Hey Beam Tribe, it's Clayton from Pittsburgh, and we're going to talk about how to assess your hip capsule, specifically for internal and external rotation. So a lot of times people have a lot of external rotation or more external rotation and very minimal internal rotation. So there's a high level of importance for being able to internally rotate your hip, okay? So a lot of times people don't really spend a lot of time in internal rotation. So let me give you a few examples and you can kind of see and connect the dots how that happens. So let's say you're sitting on the floor, crisscross applesauce. Both of our hips are externally rotated. Let's say you're sitting like this on the ground and then your hips rotate out like this, externally rotated. Let's say you're sitting on a chair and then you cross the leg over, external rotation. Let's say you're sitting on the bus and then you cross your ankles, external rotation. Let's say you're in a yoga class and you're in Warrior Two, right? External rotation for both hips. There's a lot of external rotation that is built into our day, and you can see a lot of people even walking externally rotated at the hip and then not getting good toe off when they are going through the gait cycle. So it's important to be able to have internal rotation, and there's a lot of issues where if people don't have internal rotation, then your back tries to do the work that your hips should be doing, and then your back gets overworked and your hips are underworked, and then stuff just gets cranky. So we're going to talk about how to assess your hips specifically for internal and external rotation, and so that you can work on improving that and just spend a little bit more time in internal rotation. And what you'll find is the cramp monster is going to come up and bite you a lot. So because if you don't spend time in a position, you're basically unfamiliar with that space, and then your body doesn't really know how to work in that space, recruit tissue in that space, or generate force via isometrics. So it kind of cramps, and that's kind of the experience. So let's get into it. We're going to come onto our back. We're going to assess the right hip first, okay? So I like to keep the left foot planted on the ground, and then you can kind of scoot it out so you have clearance. The right hip is going to flex to about 90 degrees, okay? I like the left foot on the ground because it really helps keep the pelvis and the lower back neutral and comfortable. So hands on the hips like you're feeling sassy, and this is going to help give you some cueing and some feedback if you're kind of laterally flexing the spine or not. So what we're going to do is imagine your thigh is a flagpole sticking straight up from the ground, perpendicular. We're going to externally rotate this hip, okay? And we're going to spend a couple breaths here. So I want you to think of spiraling the inner thigh. Try and get as much engagement in the inner thigh and the calf as you can. Try and think of the deepest stuff connected to that hip capsule. Now, here's where you keep your hands on your hips. We're going to internally rotate. And we're going to try and get as far out as we can. Far out, man. And then here's typically where the cramp monster is going to bite you, right here, okay? So take a look and see where your hip is rotated and see how far or how little it rotates. Let's come back to external rotation. Again, thighs straight up, not like this or out like this, just straight up rotating in that capsule. And one more internal rotation for this right hip. Stay with your breath. See if you can get a little bit further, see what needs to squeeze. Good, come back to neutral and place that right foot on the ground and then flex that left hip at 90. Again, if you're bumping into your knee here, just walk that right foot out a little further so you can get that clearance. So left hip's flexed at 90 degrees. Let's go ahead and externally rotate. So here too, I don't want you to just think to how can I get my ankle out here? I want you to think of what in my thigh needs to spiral, engage, and squeeze to get that maximal rotation. And let's internally rotate, swivel nice and smooth. Try and get as far internally rotated as you can. If you feel that cramp coming on, see if you can stick in the position, but just ease up on how much you're squeezing. And let's go ahead and externally rotate. And one more internal rotation. Again, this thigh is straight up like a flagpole, and we're trying to get as far out as we can. Again, you shouldn't be feeling it in your low back or flexing laterally at the spine. You should feel all hip stuff. And back to neutral and down. Cool. So if you were feeling a lot of lower back stuff, that's information for you that your lower back's trying to do the job and the work of your hip. So this is a really good self-assessment tool and a really good way to get in there. And again, if you are experiencing that cramping, I want to encourage you to try and stay as close to that line as you can. So if this is the line in the sand where over here I'm cramping and here I'm okay, I want you to see if you can stay as close to this line. I almost call it like teasing the cramp or flirting with that line of cramping. The closer you are to this line, the more that you're in your end range and the more you're getting strength training in that end range position, and you're just gonna push the bar and actually improve your end range hip mobility. Cheers.